welcome to the Fairhaven Church Parent Talks podcast, where we desire to equip and empower you as parents to lead well in your home. Today, we're so excited because it is Easter Sunday, and I am joined by Caleb and Nicole, and we're going to have just a great time discussing this really, really important day in the life of our faith. So before we get started, I gave you guys a little time to process this question, which I don't normally do, but what is your favorite Easter tradition that either you remember from childhood or you are practicing today with your family?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was glad you gave a heads up.
Yeah,
because I had time to think, and I actually thought of a really good one.
Okay.
Our neighborhood that we live in right now does this event called the Egger Beggar. Have you guys heard that phrase before?
No.
I have no idea if someone in my neighborhood came up with it or if it's a thing.
Yeah.
But if you want to participate, like you kind of like say you'll do it, like your house will be a part of it, and you set up like a little Easter egg hunt in your front yard, either with like eggs or like little like treat bags. And then you go around and like your kids gets to like go through all the yards and like do a little hunt along like the streets and stuff. So that's coming up. I'm pretty excited about it. Yeah, it's a fun thing.
So it's like almost like a trick-or-treating type of thing?
Yeah.
Like
Oh, you know what? I remember now. It started during COVID. That's what someone told me.
Okay.
It was like a fun spring thing to do, like Halloween, but do it in the spring. So they called it the Egger Beggar.
Oh, that's super fun.
So that's a fun thing.
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you think of anything?
I had like the pretty classic stuff. Like dye eggs, go to church, get an Easter basket. And my Easter basket was usually like a movie or like a hat or something.
Okay.
But now we have a 7-month-old, so we're open to new traditions. So if you got suggestions, we'll take any of them because now's the time where we can start having some fun with it.
Yeah.
Well, probably not this year so much, but next year.
You can start making some decisions about like how you want to do it.
Yeah, now we get to like start dreaming and having fun with it. So yeah. So if anyone's listening and has fun Easter traditions, let us know.
Mm-hmm.
You can submit those to C. Cottrell at fairhaven.church. Is that your... Oh my goodness. Whatever. I said it the right way. It's fine. Anyways.
It's recorded.
We struggle. I struggle with Caleb's last name. I panic. Every single time I have to say it.
I'm going to change my last name just for you.
That's awesome. Well, so we did something I've never heard anybody else say that they've done before at my grandparents'. So we have, I don't know, there has to be 40 cousins like at my age-ish. And we would do kite flying on Easter. Every Easter, my grandparents got every grandkid a new kite. And we would go outside and we would, do the whole like Easter egg, Easter basket thing. And then we would fly kites.
That's really fun.
It was really fun.
That's
Did
cute.
you do this in Michigan?
Yeah.
Was it freezing?
Yeah. Sometimes it was snow on the ground, but it was our tradition.
Yeah.
That's fun.
That is
It was really fun. So when we moved into the house we have now, we started trying.
Does it work?
Sometimes.
Okay.
The weather doesn't cooperate.
Yeah.
And we're not as resilient. My kids aren't as resilient as we were when we were children.
That's funny.
So anyway, it's fun. Easter traditions are super fun. So today we're going to be talking about Easter, as we said, but this whole week is Holy Week. And so we last week talked about Palm Sunday and kind of started this journey of Holy Week. And so we talked about how Jesus entered into Jerusalem on a donkey during Palm Sunday. And then we know that week ends with Jesus going to the cross. So over the past couple of weeks, we have talked about Palm Sunday. And we've also talked about the Last Supper. And we explained a few weeks ago that we're kind of going out of order. And so if you want, you can go back and you can listen to those episodes to help kind of keep everything in alignment with how it actually happened during the week. But for those of you who need a little refresher, Caleb, I asked if you would kind of walk us through those events.
Yeah. So there's a lot happening that we're going to talk about. So if I miss anything,
So much.
feel free to throw it in there. So
Yeah.
Palm Sunday, like you talked about, Jesus comes on this donkey and the triumphal entry. And usually at this time, like someone of high respect or like a king would come in on a horse, and he came on a donkey and so what we talked about with students is it shows humility. And people are shouting Hosanna, which like we often think of as like it's so fun, Hosanna, the song.
Yeah.
And but the Hebrew definition of it literally means I beg you to save or please deliver us. And so they're like, hey, we have our person who's going to save us and deliver us. And they're throwing the stuff down, like their clothes and the palm branches down. But he doesn't really save them in the way that they expected. And so then we get into the Last Supper. He's with his disciples just hours before his arrest and crucifixion and all that. And so he is talking to them and he gets down and washes their feet, knowing what Judas and Peter are going to do, knowing that he's going to be betrayed and denied, and still takes the form of something that usually like a servant would do and wash their feet. And Peter was like, no, you can't do that. And then Jesus is like, well, if you don't let me wash your feet, you're not with me. And he's like, well, then wash everything, which is funny considering what happens hours later when he denies him 3 times. But Jesus takes that form of servanthood and washes their feet. And then Judas is like, then he tells them that people are going to betray him. And Judas is like, am I the one? And Jesus is like, you said it. And so then they go into Jesus explaining communion and his body broken with the bread and his blood shed with the wine, and how we do that in remembrance. And it goes back, I think Andrew talked about it a couple weeks ago with Passover and in Exodus and how that all plays in. So I won't get into that too much, but so we take communion in remembrance of what Jesus did for us.
Yeah. We also talked about, I just keep wanting to like point us to a resource for kids and students about communion on our website. So make sure as parents, if you have questions, specifically, as Caleb just mentioned it, that you check out that What is Communion video so that you can help them understand more about what communion is and what it is that we're remembering. But Nicole, so these events, they take place over those first few days of the Holy Week. And then we find Jesus and his disciples in the Garden of Gethsemane praying. Let me tell you, I've been to the Garden of Gethsemane.
Ooh,
It is incredible.
nice.
I just can't believe, like, when you're there, how much the world is tuned out. Because in Israel, it is crazy. There's a lot of traffic. There's a lot happening, but you're in that garden, and it's just amazing. It's just amazing. So anyway, but so it begins with this time of prayer, but the events of the week really take a sharp turn.
Yeah.
So can you walk us
absolutely.
through, like, what's happening?
Yeah. So you see Jesus and his disciples go to the garden, and Jesus is really starting to feel the weight of what is coming. And he asks his disciples to like stay and almost like look over him while he goes off and prays alone. And he comes back and his disciples had fallen asleep. And he says, please wake up and like, please look over me while I'm going and praying. And it happens again. And he comes back and there's 3 times of going back and forth. But those prayers, those moments that he's having with God in prayer, I know I have personally taken away so much from those examples of prayer, of what it looks like to be able to pray the desires of your heart and pray for God's will to be done. Because I know I have struggled with that feeling conflicting to pray both of those, but you see Jesus do it in the garden. So it's just a great model of prayer and what he's walking through, and just feeling what is coming. And so he comes back to his disciples the last time, and he's basically like, you know, this is it. Like, the one who betrays me is coming. He knows exactly, like, as he's speaking, they see Judas come with a whole group of men. Jesus knows what it is. And Judas says to the other men, you'll know who he is because basically, like, I'll mark him with a kiss. And he goes up to Jesus and he greets him and he kisses him. And then Jesus is arrested. And in that moment, he doesn't fight back. Again, just this model of humility, like Caleb said. He's not resisting. He's not fighting back. Actually, some of the disciples want to fight the men who are arresting Jesus. And Jesus says, no, like, don't fight this. He says, in fact, like, this is fulfilling the prophecies that we've all known and talked about. So he knows exactly what he's walking into. And so then he's brought to the high priest. And there's kind of this moment of them looking for people to like witness against Jesus, and they're not really able to find people. And then Jesus says in front of everyone, he says, I am the Son of God. Like, he doesn't try to hide at all what he's been saying about himself. He says it very plainly. And then they're like, oh, well, we don't need any other witnesses. Everyone in this room or everyone in this space is a witness to who Jesus is claiming to be. And so they say, like, he's guilty and he deserves to die. Yeah, a really just kind of, sombering moment to think about, for sure. But then it kind of like shifts over and you see Peter, who's in the courtyard of this place, and you see his 3 interactions of denying Jesus back to back. And it says that immediately, once he's denied him the 3rd time, he hears the rooster crow and bitterly weeps. He remembers that moment of Jesus washing his feet and saying that he will deny him 3 times. And immediately that's brought back to him. So again, just a really kind of sombering moment of, him weeping bitterly, realizing what he's done.
And this all happens like really in a pretty short period of time. Like I think in our minds, we see it like playing out like over days, and it's not. I mean, it's happening really, really fast. And as we know, this is what's leading up to the crucifixion of Jesus. And so Caleb, can you explain the significant events that led up to that after this point that Nicole just talked about? And then what happened during the crucifixion, and most importantly, why it is that Jesus needed to die.
Yeah. So after all this happens, there is like a trial, which wasn't really done in the legal way that it was supposed to happen. And Pontius Pilate brings out Jesus with this man Barabbas and was like, well, crowd, who should we let go? And they all say Barabbas. And so Barabbas is freed, and this guy who's like an insurrectionist and murderer and rebel and just not a good guy who didn't deserve any of that. And so then they go into the crucifixion, and Jesus is mocked and called the King of the Jews in a mocking way and not like in a way of praise or anything. And the crucifixion is brutal. A few years ago, we had a speaker who explained the crucifixion pretty in depth, and a student passed out.
Oh my goodness.
In the crowd just from hearing the details. And like the lashes they gave him were to the point of death, like as close to death as possible. And it would, a lot of it was like bones or sometimes teeth or like glass, and it would get into the muscle tissue and rip the skin off. And the Romans didn't create crucifixion, but they had essentially perfected it to be the worst death possible. And then Jesus was carrying this cross, or at least the cross beam, which could have been anywhere from like 175 pounds to 300 pounds, depending on the wood and stuff. And then he walked like at least a quarter of a mile with that on him after all of these lashes. The nails usually were like 4 to 7 inches in length. And a lot of people believe it was within like under his wrist or in his wrist area and ankles, because if you would have put it through his hand, the weight of his body would have just like ripped open. And then as their weight would give out, that would cause asphyxiation. Is that the right way to say that? Yeah. And then organ failure and heart attacks, and the shoulders and elbows would like come out of the socket, and like it's just gruesome. And that doesn't even include like the crown of thorns and the spitting and pulling of his beard and all these things that were happening to him. Just like the most torturing death that you could think of. And as he's on that cross, he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And in this moment, Jesus is taking on all of our sin to the point where like him and God cannot be together, because God cannot be in the presence of that sin. And as we talk about why he needed to die, is because he was the spotless lamb. He's the perfect lamb. And in 2 Corinthians 5:21, it says, for God made Christ, who never sinned, to be the offering for our sin, so that we could be made right with God through Christ. Because in Romans 6, the wages of sin is death. And so all of us deserve death. But Jesus on that cross took all of it for us so that we could be with him forever.
Yeah. I mean, just as you guys are both like walking through the story, it's just like incredible to reflect on the fact that the King of the universe, the King of all things, right, like was willing to die this horrible death. And I mean, they know that this is true because they've found artifacts that show that these crucifixions happened. I mean, it's just incredible that Jesus would take on all of our sin, like knowing who we are, like our true selves, that he was willing to do that for us and to die so that we could be in relationship with God. It's just
like we're no
so
different
incredible.
than Judas or Peter or Barabbas, and Jesus went on that cross knowing that even though he's taking on our sin, we're still going to sin, we're still going to mess up, and he chose to deliver us from that.
Yeah, it's just so incredible. Man. Just like overwhelming.
It is. It's a lot to sit in.
It is.
I feel sad right now
I
talking
know.
about it.
It's so heavy. It is so heavy. And yet, Jesus died. He was buried, right? we know that he was, there's a lot to the burial. There's a lot of information about who it was that buried him and how that connected to the Old Testament and prophecies and all of these different things. But we know that Jesus, he was buried using like specific Jewish customs. He was well taken care of, placed in this tomb, a huge stone rolled in front of the tomb. And then when the women showed up, which there's a lot of information as to why it's incredible that it were 3 women who were the eyewitnesses. And that's really because I won't get into too much of the apologetics behind it because I don't want this to go too long. But if you have an opportunity, like that's a significant part of the story of knowing that it really happened, that he wasn't there when they arrived. So anyway, I get a little excited about the apologetic stuff, so I'm having a hard time not just continuing to go. But they found what they were not expecting, right? And so, Nicole, can you just talk to us a little bit about that and why Jesus not being there in the tomb is so significant and the most critical part of our faith?
I mean, the resurrection, it is why we praise and worship God. Like it is the story that we're living in right now, which praise God, that we're in this piece of the story and that we live with the resurrection. Without the resurrection, death would still reign. Jesus would die and we die. Like it would be that death was the conqueror almost in that moment. But Jesus defeated death. He conquered death. So it's only through both the death on the cross and the resurrection that Jesus truly defeats death. And you think back to like the old covenant, there were sacrifices made for sins of animals who died. And, and that was like a sacrifice, like a momentary sacrifice. And then it continued. There were more sacrifices. But this death, because Jesus resurrected, it is an eternal sacrifice. It's one that we still are living under today in the new covenant. And so it requires our humility and our repentance, like we saw Jesus model through his death on the cross. But now we're able to live under that perfect sacrifice.
Yeah. And this is the difference between all religions, right?
Oh, yeah.
This is how we know it's true because it was prophesied, it happened, he came back to life, he's still alive, and he is in heaven. As we learn later on, he ascended into heaven and sent us the Holy Spirit to help us to live and to be more like Jesus, which is just so incredible. I mean, today we are celebrating the best day. The very best day. So as sombering and overwhelming as it can be to think about what Jesus did for us, man, he is alive. And that is, praise God, absolutely incredible. This past couple of weeks, we've been focusing on a Bible verse, and it was really neat to be teaching at Northmont a couple of weeks ago and be able to spend some time actually with one of the elementary kiddos walking through this verse, helping her memorize it. And I just want to recite it because it's just so important. It's Romans 5:8, and it says, "But God showed his great love for us by sending Christ to die for us while we were still sinners." And I just kind of kept repeating that with her, and it just kept sinking further and further into my own heart. He showed his love for us by sending his son to die while we were still sinners, in spite of our sin. And the reality that we are still sinners, he sent his son. And so that's just so incredible. And I hope that today on Easter Sunday, someone's life is transformed for eternity. I hope that someone recognizes the reality of this on Easter Day, and that if you have questions or you're wrestling through, like, what does this all mean, that you'll reach out to somebody at the church, and maybe you or one of your kids or students will make a decision for Jesus. That would be absolutely incredible. And so it's a good day.
Yeah.
And
it's a great day.
Reach 2 day. Like the people we've been praying for. Hopefully there are some awesome stories out there of people who came to church that you were praying for.
Yeah.
I've got people that I'm really hoping tune in, whether online or in person.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's great. I'm glad you brought that up, because I was thinking about the number of kids and students we've been able to pray for over the past few weeks. It's hundreds. Hundreds.
Yeah.
And I just love that we're helping kids and students to recognize that they need to be thinking through, who is it in my sphere who doesn't know Jesus, and how can I start praying for them so that hopefully the Lord will use them
Right.
plant
Yeah.
those seeds of faith.
Right. This story should be extremely motivating for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I love that. Well, it's a great conversation, great discussion. We love Easter. So it's a great day. Hope that you celebrate well with your family, and we will see you all next week.